What would you do if you found out a major institution was profiting off of your ancestor's image? What if you found out the same ancestor was a slave and it was impossible for him to give his consent for anyone to profit off of his image? Do not miss the Tamara Lanier story, only on Greatness 5.
August 14th, 1862, President Lincoln met with a delegation of black leaders to make his case for the voluntary immigration of African Americans to countries outside of the U.S. Your race suffers from living among us, while ours suffer from your presence. It is best for us both, therefore, to be separated.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's guest, Tamara Lanier. Our story begins in the early 1800s in the Congo River Basin, where a free young African man was kidnapped and transported to a South Carolina plantation. Separated from his entire family and village, he was now forced to adjust to living in hell, working from sunup to sundown without pay or the ability to speak English. And if you were caught trying to read or write, it could lead to your eyes being gouged out or death. Years later, the young man named Renty was taken stripped naked in front of a Harvard social scientist named Louis Agassiz, who took pictures of various body parts of Africans to dehumanize them in an attempt to justify that Africans were animals and not humans.
These degrading pictures that Agassiz took eventually were used in books, magazines, journals, newspapers, and films all around the world.
Years later, Renty passed away, but the stories of Renty's life was passed on for 3 generations until it reached a little girl named Tamara Lanier. Throughout Tamara's entire life, the name Renty meant pride and dignity, until one day, by chance or by the hand of God, Papa Renty came back to life right before Tamara's eyes, catapulting her into perhaps the biggest reparations case of all time. You are watching the Greatness 5 channel. Like, subscribe, and share now. Tamara Lanier immediately drew national attention by asking a simple question to Harvard University: how can you profit off of my ancestor's image when it was impossible for him to give permission to these degrading images when he didn't have any rights at the time? To make matters worse, Tamara discovered that Papa Renty's daughter, Delia, was also subjugated to these dehumanizing photographs.
So when you saw his face the first time, what did you feel in your soul when you connected the picture? Because you had to see those pictures before, am I right? I saw those pictures before.
I hadn't seen those pictures. Now, mind you, I'm a student of history. I loved history in high school. When I went to college, I majored in English, but then in my last year, I added on a double major, which was history, because I had more history classes than English classes, and I just loved history.
Right.
But when I saw that picture for the first time, and just for context, I actually ran. I was downtown Norwich speaking to an elderly guy who owned a small ice cream shop. And I was telling him about a promise that I had made to my mother to do the family genealogy project. And he offered to help. And he was the one who found Papa Renti on the internet and sent me some of the context, some of the backstory, and the image. And so when I talked to him, I really didn't have, I'm like, this is 2010 and the internet is just coming into its own at that point.
Right.
What is my enslaved ancestor doing on the internet? And I didn't have confidence that he had found something that was really relevant to me. And so I didn't pay attention. I went back to work, came home later, and I ultimately sat down and opened the documents that he had sent me. And I read about the scientific racism, and I'm like, oh, this is dark stuff. And then when I opened the image of Papa Renti, I will, that is a moment I will take with me to my grave, because I remember thinking, I knew immediately, this is the man that I have heard so many stories about for my entire life. This is the man that my two daughters, have heard so many stories about for their entire life. And I called them and I said, come here. You have to see this image of Papa Renti. This is the Papa Renti that we've heard so much about. And I like to joke, because my kids talk about our eyes being the same, and I call them my Renti bags, and my bags under my eyes. And, but in looking at him, there was so much that I saw that was familiar to me, that was family to me. But the stubborn stare down that's there, I'm like, gosh, I felt as if he was communicating to me. And so for me, a person who has grown up all of my life hearing the oral histories about who this man was, my enslaved ancestor, Papa Renti, he was a self-taught man. He was an educator. He taught his children. He taught anyone who had a desire to read. He taught them. And he also taught from the Bible. And he also, he was this community person, but he was not illiterate. He was literate, not only literate, but he was an educator. And he taught himself to read using a book, Noah Webster's Blueback Speller. And the slave called it the Blueback Webster. But the point being that if you don't, this is one thing that my mom always said, if you don't know how to read, it's not an easy feat to teach yourself. And I actually have a copy of Noah Webster's Speller. I don't believe me in my capacity as I am today could have taught myself to read using that book.
Did anybody just whisper in your ear, hey, Tamara, I don't know if you want to do this?
Yeah.
Did anybody do that?
Well, let me tell you, I was never dissuaded. I talked to a number of attorneys. And so, when you think about it, you approach an attorney and say, hey, I have this 200-year-old reparations case, but it's a good case. It's a good
right.
case. And they're like, against Harvard, the most powerful and influential institute in the world. They're like, I don't want to be involved. So I had difficulty convincing other people. And when I talk about God's providence and putting people in my path, I was at a convention or conference where Ben Crump was speaking. And I go up to him, and in the process of trying to take a selfie with him, I am just rattling off about this case against Harvard. And I'm telling him crazy things like, this is going to be as big as your Trayvon Martin case. And the issue about reparations is what young people have latched on, and they care about it. And I was saying this can be potentially big. And we exchanged business cards, and then maybe about a week later, he calls me and he says, Miss Lanier, this is Ben Crump. He said, I'm very interested in, what we had started to talk about, and I'd love to hear more. When we talk about the transference of generational wealth and plundered property, this case sets the precedent, and that's why it's so important to me, because I'm not the only one who has looked in my family tree and found plundered property. And every day you pick up the newspaper, you see families getting their beachfront property back. We see Henrietta Lacks' family fighting for this.
Yes.
We had property, we had wealth, but it was plundered from us legally.
Yeah.
And property was taken from them. And just as this country has made allowances for victims of the Holocaust.
Oh, yes.
When your property has been plundered or expropriated, there's legislation that says give that back.
Okay.
For Japanese American, when they, for reparations, and the government found a way to make them whole and give them back what they lost.
Yeah.
Everybody but us. Okay?
Yeah. What would your mother say if she was here now? Oh, my Lord.
And I wrestle with that because she would so want to see this image, but it would break her down and it would hurt her to her core to know that her beloved Papa Renty, the man that she grew up hearing so many stories about, was treated in that way.
Oh, okay.
She was mad about it.
Yeah. What would you say to our future generation? What would you say to them, that the ones that aren't even here yet? What would you say to them?
That they owe the generation that came before them a debt. And that debt is to be the best person that they could be, to aspire to be more and not be limited by any not only limitations that you put on yourself or that others put on you. You owe it to the generation that came before you, that sacrificed for you to be the best person you could be.
Just recently, the Massachusetts Supreme Court allows emotional distress claim against Harvard to proceed in the suit over photos of enslaved people. Tamara Lanier continues to fight for the soul of Renty. Free Renty. Legacy. What is your legacy? Legacy.
The Legacy Docu-Podcast premieres November 11th on the Greatness 5 channel, only on YouTube.
Some people say that Michael Lookup Sledge was faster than the legendary Bruce Lee. Check out his story right now on the Greatness 5 channel.